Chapter 1. The night. She stopped running. The rain came down like judgment. Princess Alara pressed her back against the crumbling stone wall of the abandoned chapel, her breath fogging in the November cold. 3 days since she'd fled the palace. 3 days since her father had stood before the assembled court and declared her bloodline worthless, her daughters a curse, her womb a failure to the crown. 3 girls. 3 beautiful, breathing girls. Her hands trembled as she pulled her sodden cloak tighter. The midwives had taken them before she'd even held the youngest. For their own protection, the high priest had said, as if mercy could disguise exile. Thunder cracked overhead. She flinched, then froze. Footsteps. Not the heavy tread of palace guards or the shuffle of rural villagers. These were measured, deliberate, the sound of someone who moved through darkness as if they owned it. Alara's pulse hammered. She'd chosen this route precisely because no one came here. The chapel had been abandoned for decades, ever since the Cardinal Wars, when the church had tried to purge the old houses and lost. Now it stood as a monument to foolish ambition, wrapped in superstition and shadows. The footsteps stopped just beyond the doorway. "You're trespassing." The voice was male, low, and carried the kind of authority that made her spine straighten instinctively. "This ground belongs to House Thorn." Alara's throat went dry. She'd heard stories about the houses, the vampire families who ruled the night, who'd negotiated their survival through blood oaths and ancient treaties. Common folk whispered that they could hear a heartbeat from 100 paces, that they moved faster than sight, that they remembered centuries the way mortals remembered yesterday. She'd always assumed the stories were exaggerated. "I didn't know." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I'm just passing through," silence stretched. Then he stepped into the doorway, and what little moonlight penetrated the storm caught him in silver relief. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and features that might have been carved from marble. Beautiful in the way Gothic cathedrals were beautiful, cold, precise, and vaguely unsettling. His clothes were expensive but understated. Black wool, tailored perfectly, no adornments except a silver ring on his right hand. His eyes, though. Even in the dim light, she could see they were wrong. Too pale, too bright, like winter frost given consciousness. Passing through. He repeated her words as if testing them for lies. At midnight, in a storm, wearing silk beneath that cloak and carrying nothing but fear. Heat crept up her neck. "My circumstances are my own." "Your circumstances," he said, moving into the chapel with unsettling grace, "brought you into House Thorn territory during a blood moon. That makes them my concern." She pressed harder against the wall. "I don't know what that means." "It means every vampire within 50 miles can smell you." He stopped 10 feet away, his gaze tracking her with predatory focus. "It means you're either catastrophically ignorant or running from something worse than us." "Both," Alara admitted, because lying seemed pointless. "I'm running from the palace. From my father. From," her voice cracked, "from everything." His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind those pale eyes. Curiosity, perhaps, or calculation. The palace. He tilted his head slightly. "You're the disgraced princess. The one who produced 3 daughters and no heir." Shame burned through her chest. "If you're going to mock me, just kill me and be done with it." "I don't mock prey," he said flatly. "And I don't kill without cause." He studied her for another long moment, then exhaled, an oddly human gesture. "You can't stay here. House Devereaux patrols the southern roads, and they're less discriminating than I am about mortal blood. Where am I supposed to go? That's not my concern." But he didn't move. Didn't leave. Just stood there in his perfect stillness, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Then his head snapped toward the door. "Too late," he murmured. Alara heard them a heartbeat later, horses moving fast. Torches cutting through the rain. Voices shouting orders in a language she didn't recognize. "Devereaux hunters," he said, his tone gone hard. "They're tracking you. That's impossible." I've been careful. You're bleeding. He nodded toward her left hand. She looked down. Her palm was scraped raw from climbing over a stone wall hours ago. In her exhaustion, she'd forgotten about it entirely. Blood calls to blood, he said, especially tonight. They'll be here in 30 seconds. Panic clawed up her throat. Then I'll hide. They'll find you. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, and suddenly he was right there, towering over her, close enough that she could see the inhuman stillness of his chest. No breath, no heartbeat. You have one chance, he said quietly. You come with me, now, or I leave you to them, and what happens next will make your father's judgment look merciful. She stared up at him, her mind racing. Every instinct screamed danger, but beneath the fear was something else, a strange, irrational certainty that this man, this monster, was offering her the only thread of safety in a world that had turned razor sharp. Why would you help me? His smile was cold and brief. I'm not helping you. House Thorne and House Devereaux have been at war for 2 centuries. Denying them their prize is simply strategy. The horses were close now. She could hear steel being drawn. Decide, he said. Alara looked at his outstretched hand, pale, long-fingered, steady as stone, and made the choice that would unravel everything she'd ever known. She took it. His grip was iron cold. He pulled her away from the wall with effortless strength, then swept his cloak around her shoulders. Don't scream, he warned, and don't let go. Then the world blurred, and she was falling through darkness faster than thought itself. Chapter 2. The House of Thorns Alara's stomach lurched as the world snapped back into focus. They were no longer in the chapel. Instead, she found herself in a vast entrance hall lit by dozens of candles and iron sconces. The architecture was old, centuries old, with vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow and walls lined with portraits whose subjects seemed to watch with painted eyes. Her knees buckled. The vampire's hand tightened on her arm, keeping her upright. Breathe, he said, his tone clinical. The disorientation will pass. She gulped air, her head spinning. What? How did we... Vampire speed. Your human perception can't process it, so your mind fills in the gaps with nothing. He released her once she'd steadied. Welcome to House Thorne. Alara looked around, trying to orient herself. Through a tall window, she could see they were somewhere elevated. A cliff, perhaps, or a mountain. The storm still raged outside, but here the air was still and smelled of old stone and beeswax. Where are we? 40 miles north of where you were. He shrugged off his wet cloak and draped it over an ornate chair. Beneath, his shirt was pristine despite the rain. House Devereaux won't track you here. Our border wards will confuse their bloodhounds. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how small she was in this cavernous space. How vulnerable. You said this wasn't about helping me. It isn't. He moved toward a side table where a crystal decanter sat beside several glasses. But keeping you alive long enough to irritate my enemies serves my purposes. How comforting. He poured something dark red into a glass, wine, she hoped desperately, and took a measured sip. His eyes tracked her over the rim. You're cold, hungry, exhausted, and you're about to ask me a dozen questions I don't have patience to answer. Then what do you suggest? Food, dry clothes, sleep. He set down the glass. In the morning, we'll discuss terms. Terms? You think sanctuary is free? His smile was sharp. Nothing in our world is free, princess. Not safety, not silence, and certainly not protection from House Devereaux. Fear spiked through her exhaustion. What do you want? He studied her for a long moment, those pale eyes unnervingly direct. I haven't decided yet, but your leverage, whether you realize it or not. A disgraced royal fleeing her father's court, hunted by a rival house on a blood moon. That's a complication. Complications have value. I'm not a bargaining chip. You became one the moment you set foot in house territory. He moved past her toward a sweeping staircase. Follow me, unless you'd prefer to sleep in the entrance hall. Alara wanted to argue, to demand answers, to reassert some illusion of control, but her body betrayed her. Her legs ached, her head pounded. and the adrenaline that had kept her moving for 3 days was finally draining away. She followed him. The room he brought her to was smaller than the hall, but no less unsettling. A 4-poster bed dominated the space, its curtains heavy velvet the color of dried blood. A fireplace crackled with fresh logs, and a basin of water steamed on a washstand. "There are clothes in the wardrobe," he said from the doorway. "Nothing will fit perfectly, but it's better than wet silk. The door locks from the inside, though it won't stop me if I need to enter." She turned sharply. "Why would you need to enter? If the house is breached, if you injure yourself, if you do something foolish." He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "You're mortal, princess. You're fragile in ways you don't understand yet." "I'm not a child." "No," he agreed, "but you're human, and humans break." The words hung between them, neither threat nor comfort, just flat observation. "What do I call you?" she asked, because it suddenly seemed absurd that she'd let this stranger pull her through darkness without even knowing his name. He hesitated, as if the question surprised him. "Cassian. Lord Cassian Thorne, if we're being formal, but formality seems pointless now." "Cassian," she repeated. It felt strange on her tongue, intimate despite everything. "And you're Alara," he said. "Not your highness, not princess. Those titles died when you crossed my threshold. Here, you're just a woman who made a desperate choice." She didn't know if that was freedom or erasure. "Will they come for me?" she asked quietly. "Devereaux, eventually?" Cassian's expression darkened. "They're patient, and they hold grudges across centuries. But they won't strike openly, not while you're under House Thorne protection. It would violate the Conclave Treaty." "The what?" "The agreement that keeps us from tearing each other apart every generation." He pushed away from the doorframe. "Get some rest. We'll talk more when you're coherent." He moved to leave, then paused. "One rule," he said without turning. "Don't leave this room before dawn. The house isn't safe at night for your kind." "Your kind," Alara echoed. "You mean humans." "I mean prey." The door closed behind him with a soft click. Alara stood frozen for several heartbeats, then crossed to the door and turned the lock. The mechanism was solid iron, old but well-maintained. It would keep out a human intruder. She doubted it would slow Cassian at all. Moving mechanically, she stripped off her ruined clothes and washed with the warm water. Her reflection in the small mirror above the basin shocked her. Hollow eyes, tangled hair, a face carved thin by grief and sleepless nights. 3 days ago, I was a princess. Now I'm leverage. She found a nightgown in the wardrobe, soft linen that smelled faintly of lavender. It hung loose on her frame, but the fabric was warm against her chilled skin. The bed called to her like a siren song. She climbed beneath the heavy quilts and let her body sink into the mattress. Outside, the storm continued its assault. But here, in this room that smelled of old wood and candle wax, she felt something she hadn't felt since the midwives had taken her daughters. Not safety, exactly, but the absence of immediate death. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was of pale eyes watching her from the darkness, and a voice promising nothing except survival. For now, that would have to be enough. Chapter 3. The things she noticed. Alara woke to silence. Not the peaceful quiet of morning, but the profound stillness of a place where nothing living stirred. No birdsong, no servants moving through distant corridors, no clockwork rhythm of a household waking, just silence, thick as velvet. She sat up slowly, disoriented. Pale light filtered through the heavy curtains, not sunrise gold, but the flat gray of an overcast afternoon. She'd slept through the entire morning. Her body ached less than expected, though hunger gnawed at her stomach. The fire had burned down to embers, but the room remained warm. On the washstand, she found fresh water in the basin, and a tray beside it. Bread, cheese, dried fruit, and a pot of tea that was somehow still hot. No one had entered. The door was still locked from the inside, yet someone had provided breakfast. Alara dressed quickly in the clothes she found laid out. Simple but well made. A wool dress in deep gray that fit surprisingly well. Whoever had chosen them knew her measurements with unsettling accuracy. She ate standing by the window, looking out over terrain she didn't recognize. The house perched on a cliff edge, surrounded by dense forests that stretched toward mountains in the distance. Below, a river cut through the valley like a silver scar. Beautiful, isolated, impenetrable, a perfect fortress. When she finally unlocked the door, she found the corridor empty. More portraits lined the walls here. Men and women in clothing that spanned centuries, all sharing the same unsettling beauty. The same pale eyes, thorns, generations of them frozen in paint and memory. "You're awake." She spun. Cassian stood at the far end of the hallway, utterly motionless. He wore different clothes. Charcoal gray today, equally perfect, but looked exactly as he had last night. No signs of fatigue, no morning dishevelment. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked. "A few minutes. I heard your heartbeat change when you woke." He moved toward her with that same unnatural grace. "You slept 14 hours. You were listening to my heartbeat? I can hear everything in this house." He said it matter-of-factly, as if eavesdropping on someone's pulse was perfectly normal. "Sound carries differently at night. Your breathing, your movements, they're loud to me." Alara fought the urge to step back. That's deeply unsettling. Most truth about vampires is. He stopped a respectful distance away. "You'll adjust, or you won't, and you'll stay afraid. Either way, I can't change what I am." She studied him in the afternoon light. He looked less severe than he had in the storm, or perhaps she was just less terrified. His features were sharp, but not cruel, and there was intelligence in those pale eyes that suggested centuries of accumulated observation. "You don't breathe," she said suddenly. His eyebrow lifted. "You noticed. Your chest doesn't move. Not even slightly." She'd been watching for it unconsciously. "And you're cold. I felt it when you pulled me through the... whatever that was last night. Vampire speed," he supplied. "And yes, we don't breathe unless we choose to. Habit, mostly, or for speaking. Our bodies don't generate heat the way yours does. But your heart beats. I can see your pulse." She gestured toward his throat, where the faintest rhythm was visible against his pale skin. "Blood still moves through us, just slower, once every 30 seconds or so." He tilted his head, curious. "Most humans don't notice these things. They're too busy being frightened." "I'm terrified," Alara admitted, "but fear doesn't make me blind." Something flickered across his expression. Approval, perhaps, or surprise. "Come. You have questions, and I have terms to discuss." He led her through the house, and she catalogued details with growing unease. No mirrors, no religious symbols, windows fitted with shutters so thick they could block out the sun entirely, and everywhere that profound quiet, as if the house itself was holding its breath. They reached a library lined with books that smelled of leather and time. Cassian gestured toward a chair near the fireplace, then took the one opposite. "The terms are simple," he began. "You stay here under House Thorn protection. In exchange, you provide information about the palace, its defenses, its alliances, its vulnerabilities." Alara's stomach dropped. "You want me to betray my father?" "I want you to survive," he corrected. "Your father exiled you. Your court stripped your titles. Your children were taken. You owe them nothing. They're still my people. They stopped being your people the moment they cast you out." His voice was cold, pragmatic. "House Devereaux is hunting you because you're valuable leverage against the crown. If they capture you, they'll use you to destabilize the treaty between vampires and mortals. Thousands will die. And what will House Thorn do with the information I provide? Keep the balance." He leaned forward slightly. "The treaty exists because neither side can afford total war. But your father's been building weapons. Iron-tipped arrows, blessed silver, fire traps. He's preparing for conflict." Alara's breath caught. "You can't know that. We know everything that happens in the dark, Princess. And your father's ambitions aren't as secret as he thinks." Cassian's expression hardened. "He wants to break the treaty, reclaim house territories, eliminate vampire influence entirely. That's suicide." "Yes. Which is why I need to know how far his preparations have gone." He paused. Help me prevent a war neither side will survive. That's the price of sanctuary. She wanted to refuse, wanted to cling to some scrap of loyalty to the crown, to the kingdom that had been her entire world. But then she remembered the high priest's words. For their own protection, the way her father had looked through her as if she'd ceased to exist. If I agree, she said slowly, what happens to me after? When you have what you need? Cassian was quiet for a long moment. That depends on what you want. Freedom. Freedom to do what? Return to a palace that exiled you? Reclaim daughters you'll never be allowed to raise? His voice was brutal in its honesty. Your old life is gone. You need to decide what your new one looks like. The words struck like physical blows. Because he was right. Devastatingly, inescapably right. I don't know, she whispered. Then figure it out while you're here. He stood, signaling the conversation's end. You have access to the library, the East Wing, and the gardens. Don't enter the West Wing. Don't leave the property. And don't go outside after dark. Why not? His smile was thin and humorless. Because I'm not the only vampire who lives here, and the others aren't as interested in keeping you alive. He left her there, surrounded by books and silence, with the weight of impossible choices settling onto her shoulders. Chapter 4. Small Mercies. 3 days passed in strange suspension. Alara spent her mornings in the library, surrounded by books that documented centuries of vampire history. Treaties written in blood, genealogies of houses that rose and fell like tides, detailed accounts of the Cardinal Wars, when the Church had tried to exterminate vampire kind and nearly succeeded. She learned that vampires couldn't create new vampires without conclave permission, a law designed to prevent population, explosions that would destabilize the blood supply, that they were bound by invitation laws. A vampire couldn't enter a home uninvited without suffering excruciating pain, that sunlight didn't destroy them instantly, but burned slowly, agonizingly, over hours of exposure. The lore was more nuanced than folklore suggested, more tragic. Cassian appeared each afternoon like clockwork, always precisely at sunset. He'd ask pointed questions about palace layout, guard rotations, her father's council members. She'd answer carefully, offering information that felt strategic rather than treasonous. He never pushed when she hesitated, never threatened, just waited with that infinite patience that came from living centuries. But it was the small things she noticed that unsettled her most. On the fourth evening, she found him in the library before sunset, standing motionless by the window. The shutters were still closed, but his posture suggested he was listening to something outside. You're early, she said. The sun sets earlier each day. He didn't turn. Winter is coming. Alara moved closer, curious. Do you miss it? Daylight? I barely remember it. His voice was distant. I was turned in 1643, nearly 4 centuries ago. The details fade after so long. What warmth felt like on skin, how colors looked under noon sun. Memory is imperfect even for us. That sounds like a kind of dying. It is. Finally, he looked at her. We don't age, but we lose pieces of ourselves anyway. Time erodes everything eventually, even immortality. There was something raw in his admission, a crack in the cold facade he maintained. Alara found herself asking the question before she could stop herself. Why were you turned? His expression shuddered. That's not relevant to our arrangement. No, she agreed. But I told you about my daughters, about the exile. You know the worst parts of my story. Knowing your wounds serves a purpose. Mine don't. Maybe not strategically. She held his gaze. But if we're going to share this space, I'd like to know who I'm sharing it with. Cassian studied her for a long moment, then moved to the fireplace. He stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him. A posture that might have been military once, centuries ago. I was a soldier, he said finally. Fighting in the English Civil War. Wounded badly at Marston Moor. Left for dead in a field full of corpses. His voice remained carefully neutral. A vampire found me, offered me a choice, die in the mud or live forever in shadow. That's not much of a choice. It wasn't meant to be. She was lonely. He turned slightly, and something in his profile looked carved from grief. Vampire who turns you becomes your sire. It's an intimate bond, deeper than family, stranger than marriage. She turned me, taught me to hunt, brought me into House Thorn. What happened to her? She walked into the sun 70 years later. His tone didn't change, but his hands tightened. Said she'd lived long enough, that the world had changed too much, and she was tired of changing with it. Ilara's chest constricted. I'm sorry. Don't be. She made her choice, same as I made mine. But there was something hollow in the words, as if he'd repeated them so many times they'd lost meaning. Vampires don't die of old age, princess. We die of loneliness or boredom or despair. The ones who survive learn not to attach to anything that won't last centuries. That sounds like another kind of death. It's survival. He finally met her eyes again. You asked who I am. That's the answer. Someone who learned to endure by feeling nothing. The words hung between them, heavy with implication. But before Ilara could respond, he straightened and moved toward the door. Your dinner is waiting in your room. I have business to attend to. He was gone before she could say thank you. That night, she dreamed of her daughters. 3 perfect faces, each barely glimpsed before the midwives had swept them away. In the dream, they were older, walking, talking, reaching for her with small hands. But every time she tried to hold them, they dissolved into mist. She woke gasping, tears on her cheeks, and found Cassian sitting in the chair by her fireplace. Ilara sat up sharply, pulling the blankets to her chest. What are you doing here? You were crying. His face was in shadow, but his voice was quiet. Nightmare? That's none of your concern. You're under my protection. Your distress is my concern. He leaned forward slightly, and the firelight caught his features. I didn't enter without permission. The door was ajar. She didn't remember leaving it open, but her hands were shaking, and the dream still clung to her like cobwebs. They took my daughters before I could even name them, she whispered. I held them for minutes, just minutes, and now I'm losing even the memory of their faces. Cassian was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. Memory is cruel. It keeps what hurts and lets go of what heals. He paused. But it doesn't mean they weren't real. Your grief proves they existed. Something in his tone told her he wasn't just talking about her daughters. Does it get easier? She asked. The loss? No, but you get stronger around it, like scar tissue. He stood, moving toward the door. Try to sleep. Dawn is still hours away. Cassian, he paused. Thank you, she said, for listening, for not pretending it doesn't matter. He didn't turn, but she saw his shoulders shift, as if the words had landed somewhere tender. It matters, he said quietly. Everything that hurts matters. That's what makes us more than monsters. Then he was gone, the door clicking softly shut behind him. Ilara lay back down, staring at the ceiling. The nightmare had loosened its grip, replaced by something stranger, a fragile thread of understanding connecting her grief to his. She fell asleep thinking of a vampire who'd learned to feel nothing, and wondering if that was entirely true. Chapter 5. Blood on the Threshold. The warning came at twilight on the 7th day. Ilara was in the gardens, a walled space behind the house where winter roses still bloomed despite the cold. She'd been sketching in a journal Cassian had provided, trying to capture the mountain view from memory, when she heard footsteps, not Cassian's measured tread. These were faster, lighter. A woman emerged from the shadowed arcade, pale as moonlight, with silver blonde hair that fell to her waist and eyes the color of amber. She wore black velvet that looked centuries old, and moved with the same predatory grace that marked all of Cassian's kind. So you're the stray he dragged home. The woman's voice was silk over steel. I wondered what could make Cassian break his own rules about mortal guests. Ilara stood slowly, pulse quickening. Your House Thorn? Margot Thorn, Cassian's cousin, though that word means something different when you've lived 3 centuries. She circled closer, studying Ilara with unsettling intensity. You smell like fear and grief. Interesting combination. Cassian said I shouldn't be outside after dark. Cassian says many things. Margot's smile showed teeth just slightly too sharp. But I'm not here to feed on you, little princess. I'm here to warn you. About what? House Devereaux sent an envoy. They know you're here. Margot's expression hardened. They're demanding Cassian surrender you to them within 3 days, or they'll consider it an act of war. The garden seemed to tilt. Why do they want me so badly? Because you're leverage against the crown. Your father's preparing for conflict with vampire kind, and you're the perfect pressure point. Disgraced enough that he can't publicly defend you, valuable enough that losing you to his enemies would humiliate him. Margot moved closer, and Alara caught the scent of old roses and something metallic. Wars aren't won with armies alone. They're won by breaking morale, and nothing breaks a king like his failures coming back to haunt him. I won't be used as a weapon. You already are. Margot's tone wasn't unkind, just pragmatic. The question is which side wields you. Cassian thinks he can negotiate, find some third path. But House Devereaux doesn't negotiate. They conquer. Before Alara could respond, Cassian appeared in the garden entrance. His expression was thunderous. Margot, inside, now. The woman's smile was knowing. Of course, cousin. Just getting acquainted with our guest. She glided past him, trailing perfume and menace. Cassian watched her go, then turned that pale gaze on Alara. I told you not to go outside after dark. She found me. I didn't seek her out. Alara lifted her chin. Is it true? House Devereaux gave you 3 days? His jaw tightened. Margot shouldn't have told you. But it's true. Yes. He moved into the garden, and she noticed he kept himself between her and the shadows. Their envoy arrived an hour ago. They want you surrendered to their house as recompense for your father's treaty violations. What violations? The weapons, the border incursions, the blessed silver he's been stockpiling. Cassian's voice was hard. Your father's been testing our defenses for months. Devereaux sees your presence here as proof that House Thorn is harboring royal enemies, which gives them justification to strike. Ilara's mind raced. You could give me to them. Avoid the conflict entirely. I could. His eyes met hers, unreadable. Is that what you want? No, she admitted, surprised by her own certainty. But I won't be the reason people die. Vampire or human. Then we find another option. He gestured toward the house. Come inside. We need to talk strategy, and I'd prefer you not be exposed while Devereaux's scouts are likely watching the property. The war room was in the west wing, the section she'd been forbidden from entering. Now she understood why. Maps covered every surface. Documents in languages she didn't recognize. And weapons. Dozens of them. From medieval swords to modern firearms, all modified with silver edges or blessed components. 3 other vampires waited inside. Margot stood by the fireplace, arms crossed. 2 men occupied chairs near the table, one dark-haired and severe, the other younger-looking with copper curls and restless energy. This is Victor and Adrian, Cassian said, nodding to each. My house counsel. They need to hear what you know about the palace defenses. Victor's gaze was cold. The mortal stays in the room while we discuss house strategy? She's the strategy, Cassian said flatly. House Devereaux wants her. The crown wants her. That makes her the center of whatever happens next. She's a liability, Victor argued. Surrender her to Devereaux with our apologies and we avoid conflict. We avoid one conflict and invite another, Cassian countered. If we capitulate now, every house will see us as weak. Devereaux will push harder, and the crown will interpret our cooperation as submission. So we risk war over one mortal woman? Victor's lip curled. Your attachment is clouding your judgment. My judgment, Cassian said, his voice dropping to something dangerous, is that letting Devereaux dictate our actions sets a precedent that will haunt us for centuries. This isn't about the mortal. It's about power. Adrian spoke up, his tone more measured. What if we negotiate? Offer Devereaux something else they want. Territory rights, blood access agreements, trade concessions. They don't want concessions. They want escalation. Margot pushed away from the fireplace. Devereaux has been looking for an excuse to challenge our position for decades. This is just the opening they needed. Alara listened to them debate her fate as if she were a chess piece rather than a person. Anger flared in her chest. "Stop," she said. 4 pairs of ancient eyes turned to her. "You're all talking about war like it's inevitable, but you haven't asked what House Devereaux actually gains by having me." She moved to the table, studying the maps. "I'm leverage against the crown, but only if I'm alive and visible. If I disappear into their house, my father can claim I died, manufacture a martyr, and use it to justify breaking the treaty entirely." Cassian's expression shifted. "You're right. They need you alive and displayed. Which means they need to publicly take me," Ilara finished, "in a way that humiliates both the crown and House Thorn." "A challenge," Victor murmured. "They'll demand a formal confrontation." "When?" Adrian asked. As if in answer, something struck the front door with a sound like thunder. Cassian's head snapped toward the entrance. "They're here. Already." Margot's eyes widened. The 3 days was misdirection. Cassian was already moving. Victor, Adrian, defensive positions. "Margot, get the mortal to the vault." "No." Ilara grabbed his arm, startling herself with the contact. His skin was ice cold through the fabric. "If this is about me, I face it. You face nothing. You're human. You'll die. Then teach me not to." She held his gaze, refusing to flinch. "I won't hide while people fight over me like I'm property." Something flickered in his expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Another impact shook the house. "Fine," he said. "But you stay behind me. And if I tell you to run, you run," she nodded. Together. They moved toward the entrance hall, where the door was splintering under supernatural force, and the war Ilara had hoped to avoid was forcing its way inside. Chapter 6. The Blood Oath. The door shattered inward in a spray of ancient wood. 3 vampires entered with the confidence of predators who'd never known fear. The one in front was tall and angular, with black hair pulled back severely and eyes like chips of obsidian. He wore formal attire, burgundy velvet that belonged in a different century, and moved with the fluid menace of something older than the house itself. Lord Thorn. His voice carried the weight of aristocratic disdain. "How disappointing that you require a barricade for a simple conversation, Lord Devereaux." Cassian's tone was ice. "Breaking and entering suggests this is more than conversation." Ilara stood slightly behind Cassian, her heart hammering so loudly she was certain every vampire in the room could hear it. The 2 vampires flanking Devereaux watched her with naked hunger. Not sexual, but predatory. The way wolves watched wounded deer. "We came for what's ours by right of blood law," Devereaux said, his gaze sliding past Cassian to fix on Ilara, the mortal princess. "She's trespassed on sacred ground during a blood moon. According to the Conclave Accords, that makes her forfeit." "She entered under my protection," Cassian countered, "which supersedes trespass law. Protection requires declaration. You made no formal claim. I claimed her the moment I brought her across the threshold." Cassian's voice hardened. "Or are you suggesting my word as House Lord carries no weight?" Devereaux's smile was razor thin. "Your word carries weight. Your judgment recently does not." He gestured elegantly toward Ilara. "Harboring a royal fugitive during treaty negotiations? Keeping secrets from the Conclave? This reeks of either desperation or treason." "Careful, Devereaux. Accusing a House Lord of treason requires proof." "I have proof." Devereaux produced a folded letter from his coat. "Correspondence between the Crown and House Thorn. Your servants have been negotiating weapons purchases. Blessed silver, specifically. Unless you're planning to redecorate, that suggests alliance with mortals against vampire kind." Cassian's expression didn't change, but Ilara felt him go still in that unnatural way vampires did when calculating violence. "That correspondence is forged." "Is it?" Devereaux's eyes glittered. "Then you won't mind if we investigate. Starting with your mortal guest, who conveniently has intimate knowledge of palace operations." The implication hung in the air like poison. "You're reaching," Margot said from behind them, her voice sharp. "Even for you, this is transparent." "I'm following the law." Devereaux's attention never left Cassian. "The mortal is a threat to the treaty. She's leverage against the crown. and her presence here without conclave approval violates our most sacred rule. We do not interfere in mortal succession." "She's not in succession," Cassian said. "She was exiled. Exile can be reversed, especially with the right pressure." Devereaux took a step closer, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "Here's what's going to happen, Thorne. You surrender the mortal to House Devereaux. We'll investigate her role in your alleged weapons dealing. If she's innocent, we'll return her. Eventually. If she's complicit, well, accidents happen to mortals all the time. Alara's blood turned to ice. No deal." Cassian said flatly. "Then you're declaring I'm declaring that House Thorne doesn't negotiate with extortion." Cassian's hand moved to the small of Alara's back, a subtle positioning that placed him more firmly between her and threat. "Leave my territory, now." Devereaux laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You can't win this, Thorne. House Devereaux has twice your numbers. The Conclave will side with us once they see the evidence, and the Crown will thank us for removing their embarrassment. The Crown won't thank anyone who harms her," Alara heard herself say. Every vampire in the room turned to stare at her. Cassian's hand pressed warning against her back, but she continued anyway. "You're right that I'm leverage, but only while I'm alive and unclaimed. Kill me and I become a martyr. My father will use my death to break the treaty entirely. Is that what House Devereaux wants? Total war with the mortal kingdoms?" Devereaux's expression darkened. "Brave words for prey. Not bravery, strategy." Her voice was steadier than she felt. "You want me as a tool, but tools only work if they're intact." "She has a point," one of Devereaux's companions murmured. Silence. Devereaux's gaze bore into Alara with unsettling intensity. "You think your mortality protects you? You're wrong. There are fates worse than death, Princess. Things we can do that leave you breathing but broken." Cassian moved with speed that blurred reality. One moment he was beside Alara. The next, he had Devereaux by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one hand. "Touch her," Cassian said softly, "and I'll show you what 4 centuries of restraint looks like when it breaks." The room erupted. Devereaux's companions lunged forward. Victor and Adrian materialized from the shadows, intercepting them. Bodies collided with supernatural speed and force. Furniture splintered. Ancient portraits crashed to the floor. Alara stumbled backward, pressing against the wall as violence exploded around her. She'd never seen vampires fight. It was faster than human combat, more brutal, each strike calculated to maim or incapacitate. Cassian threw Devereaux across the hall. The older vampire hit the far wall hard enough to crack stone, then recovered instantly, fangs bared. "You'll regret this. Thorne." "I regret many things," Cassian said, his voice gone cold and ancient. "You won't live long enough to be one of them. Enough." The word echoed with power that made Alara's bones ache. A new figure stood in the shattered doorway, a woman in gray robes, her hair white as snow, her eyes solid black from edge to edge. Power radiated from her like heat from a forge. Every vampire in the room went utterly still. "Magistrate," Devereaux said carefully, lowering into a formal bow. The woman surveyed the destruction with an expression of profound disappointment. "The Conclave sent me to investigate reports of treaty violations. Instead, I find House Lords brawling like fledglings." Her black eyes fixed on Cassian. "Explain. Quickly." Cassian released his fighting stance, though tension still coiled through his frame. "House Devereaux invaded my territory and threatened my guest. I defended both. Your guest is a mortal princess whose presence violates the non-interference clause." The magistrate's gaze shifted to Alara. "Unless you've claimed her formally. Have you?" Silence stretched like wire. "No," Cassian admitted. "Then she's unclaimed, which means I claim her now." Cassian's voice cut through the room like a blade. "By blood right, by threshold law, by my authority as House Lord." The magistrate's eyebrows rose. "You understand what you're invoking? A formal claim requires a blood oath. Binding. Permanent. Your life tied to hers until natural death takes her." Alara's breath stopped. "What?" Cassian didn't look at her. His eyes remained locked on the magistrate. "I understand. Then speak the words." He turned finally, and the expression on his face was complicated. Resignation, determination, something that might have been apology. "Alara of House Caltera," he said formally, "I offer you protection under blood oath. My life for yours, my house for your sanctuary, my death before your harm." He extended his hand, palm up. "Do you accept?" "I don't understand what this means," she whispered. "It means you're mine," he said quietly. "And I'm yours, bound until you die, protected by laws older than kingdoms. And if I refuse, then Devro takes you. Tonight." She looked at his outstretched hand, pale, steady, offering salvation wrapped in chains she didn't fully comprehend. Behind him, Devro watched with barely concealed rage. Alara took Cassian's hand. "I accept." Chapter 7. The binding. The moment their hands touched, Cassian's grip tightened. "This will hurt," he warned. Before Alara could ask what he meant, he drew a silver blade from his coat and sliced across his own palm. Blood welled, darker than human blood, almost black in the candlelight. Then he pressed the blade to her palm. She gasped as the silver bit into her skin, sharp and burning. Blood rose to meet his, bright red against his shadow dark. "By blood I bind," Cassian said, his voice taking on a ritual cadence. "By house I shelter. By oath I claim. Let no hand strike her but through me. Let no law condemn her but through me. Her life is mine to guard until mortality claims what immortality cannot." The air between their joined hands began to shimmer. Alara felt something move through her. Not pain exactly, but a presence, a connection forming like roots growing between their palms, wrapping around bone and vein. "Accept the binding," the magistrate intoned. "Speak the words." Alara's voice came out breathless. "I accept. I bind. What do I say?" "Your life for mine," Cassian prompted softly, "until death." "My life for yours," she repeated, the words feeling ancient on her tongue. "Until death." The shimmer intensified. Then something locked into place. A sensation like two puzzle pieces clicking together. The pain in her palm vanished, replaced by warmth that spread up her arm. When Cassian released her hand, a silver scar remained on her palm, identical to the one on his. Perfectly matched. Permanent. "It's done," the magistrate said. "She's blood-claimed. Under penalty of conclave law, no vampire may harm her without facing House Thorn in totality." Devro's face was murderous. "This is manipulation. He orchestrated this entire situation." "Did he orchestrate your invasion of his territory?" The magistrate's tone was dry. "Did he force you to threaten his guest? Or did you provide him exactly the justification he needed?" Devro's jaw clenched. "The conclave will hear of this." "The conclave already has." She gestured toward the door. "Leave. Before I decide your entry itself violated treaty law, and House Thorn has grounds for retaliation." For a moment, Alara thought Devereaux would refuse. His eyes locked on her with such venom that she unconsciously stepped closer to Cassian. Then he smiled, cold and promising violence. "This isn't over, Princess. Blood oaths end when mortals die. And mortals are so very fragile." He turned to his companions. "We're leaving, for now." They departed with the same predatory grace they'd entered with, leaving destruction in their wake. The magistrate studied Cassian with an unreadable expression. "You've tied yourself to a mortal. Do you understand the implications?" "Yes. If she dies, part of you dies with her. The grief will be significant." "I'm aware. And when she ages, when she sickens, when you watch her wither while you remain unchanged?" The magistrate's black eyes were ancient and knowing. "That's a special kind of torture, Lord Thorn. Most vampires avoid blood oaths for precisely that reason. I've endured worse," Cassian said flatly. The magistrate looked between them for a long moment, then nodded. I'll report that the situation has been resolved within treaty parameters. But Devereaux is right about one thing. This will have consequences. Prepare for them. She departed in a swirl of gray robes, leaving them in the ruined entrance hall. Silence fell like ash. Alara stared at the silver scar on her palm, her mind reeling. What did I just agree to? Protection, Cassian said. At a cost. What cost? For you? Very little. You're under Housethorn's sanctuary now. No vampire can harm you without declaring war on my entire bloodline. He paused. For me, it's more complicated. The magistrate said your life is tied to mine. In a sense. He moved to a broken chair and righted it mechanically. Blood oaths create a connection. I'll feel it if you're in danger. If you die violently, part of the bond's energy will backlash. Into me. Not enough to kill, but enough to incapacitate for days. And when you die naturally... He trailed off. What happens then? I'll feel it. The severance. Like losing a limb. His voice was carefully neutral. It fades, eventually. But the first few years are difficult. Horror crept through her. You've done this before? No, but I've known vampires who have. He finally looked at her, and his expression was complicated. It's not a decision I made lightly. Then why make it at all? Her voice rose. You could have let Devereaux take me, avoided this entire complication. Yes. So why didn't you? Cassian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low. Because you're not a complication. You're a person who's been treated like property your entire life. And I'm tired of watching powerful people crush those who can't fight back. The honesty in his words stole her breath. Besides, he added, his tone lightening fractionally, you were right about the leverage. Devereaux wants to use you as a weapon. I'd rather deny him that satisfaction. So this is still about strategy. Everything is about strategy when you've lived as long as I have. But something in his eyes suggested that wasn't entirely true. Before she could press further, Victor appeared in the doorway. The wards are damaged. Devereaux's people tried to breach the west boundary before they left. We need to reinforce before dawn. Cassian nodded. I'll be there shortly. He waited until Victor left, then turned back to Alara. You should rest. The blood oath is exhausting for mortals. Now that he mentioned it, she did feel drained, as if she'd run for miles. What do I do now? Just wait here under your protection forever? For now? You heal. You learn. You decide what you want your life to look like. He moved toward the door, then paused. The oath doesn't make you my prisoner, Alara. It makes you my responsibility. There's a difference. Is there? I hope so. He disappeared into the shadows, leaving her alone with the wreckage and the silver scar burning on her palm. Alara made her way back to her room, exhausted and overwhelmed. But when she reached her door, she found Margot leaning against the frame. Well, the vampire said, her amber eyes glinting. That was dramatic. I didn't ask for any of this. No one ever does. But you handled it well. Better than most mortals would. Margot pushed away from the wall. Word of advice? Don't trust Cassian's noble motivations too much. He's ancient, strategic, and very good at making sacrifices look like kindness. You're his family. Why warn me against him? Because I am his family. I've watched him carry grief like armor for centuries. Margot's expression turned serious. Blood oaths are intimate, princess. You're bound to him now in ways that go deeper than protection. He'll feel your fear, your pain, your joy, and you'll feel his emptiness. His what? That hollowness he carries, the place where his humanity used to be. She tilted her head. Be careful, because now that you're connected, you might decide to try filling it. And that never ends well for mortals. Before Alara could respond, Margot vanished with that same supernatural speed. She entered her room and locked the door, then examined the scar on her palm. It gleamed silver in the moonlight, intricate as lace, beautiful and strange. She pressed her other hand over it, and for just a moment, she felt something else through the connection. A presence. Watchful. Ancient. Alone. Cassian's consciousness. Somewhere in the house. Aware of her the way she was suddenly aware of him. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt oddly like coming home. Chapter 8. The weight of connection. Alara woke to the sensation of being watched. Not physically. The room was empty, door still locked. But through the blood oath, she felt Cassian's awareness like a distant heartbeat. Steady, constant, unsettling in its intimacy. She dressed quickly and found breakfast waiting again, along with a note in elegant script. Library. When you're ready, the house felt different in daylight. Less oppressive, though no less ancient. She passed servants now, human ones, surprisingly, who nodded respectfully as she walked. They moved with the efficient silence of people who'd learned not to disturb sleeping vampires. Cassian was in the library as promised, standing by the windows with the shutters cracked just enough to let in thin streams of morning light. He'd positioned himself carefully in shadow, but she could see the tension in his posture, as if even indirect sunlight cost him something. "You're awake," he said without turning. "I felt it through the bond." "That's going to take getting used to." She approached cautiously. "Can you feel everything?" "My thoughts, No, just general awareness. Pain, fear, strong emotions." He finally looked at her, and she noticed shadows under his eyes. Exhaustion, maybe, though she hadn't thought vampires could tire. "Distance matters. Right now, you're close enough that I feel your presence clearly. If you were across the kingdom, it would be more like intuition, a pull toward wherever you are. And you can't turn it off?" "No, it's permanent until one of us dies." His jaw tightened. "I'm sorry. I should have explained more before you accepted." "You said I'd be taken if I refused?" "Yes, but there might have been other options if I'd had time to think." He moved away from the window, deeper into shadow. Blood oaths aren't common anymore. Most vampires consider them archaic, too binding, too vulnerable. "I didn't expect to make one in my lifetime." Alara studied him. In daylight, even filtered, he looked more inhuman. Skin too pale, movements too precise, eyes reflecting light in ways human eyes didn't. But there was something raw in his expression that made him seem paradoxically more real. "Why did you?" she asked. "Really? Not strategy, not politics. Why bind yourself to me?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "Because you reminded me of someone. Your sire?" "No." He moved to the fireplace, one hand bracing against the mantel. "A long time ago, before I was turned, I had a sister. Younger by 3 years. When the war came, I left to fight. Told her I'd come back." His voice went distant. "I didn't. By the time I returned, after I'd been turned, after I'd learned to control the hunger, she'd married, had children, grown old. She didn't recognize me. Thought I was some distant cousin who'd inherited the family resemblance." Ilara's chest tightened. "Did you tell her?" "No, what would be the point? She'd lived an entire life without me, happy mostly. I had no right to disrupt that with my grief." He looked at his hands. "I watched her die from a distance. Watched her children bury her. And I thought, this is what it means to be immortal. Watching everything you love turn to dust while you remain unchanged. That's unbearable. It's existence." He met her eyes. "When Devereaux threatened you, I saw that same helplessness. Someone being used as a piece in games they didn't consent to play. And I thought just once I could choose differently. I could be the person who stands between the powerful and the powerless, instead of just observing from the shadows." "So I'm penance for your sister?" "No, you're your own person." His expression softened fractionally. "But maybe helping you is how I make peace with not helping her." The honesty in his words carved something open in Alara's chest. She moved closer, drawn by impulse she didn't fully understand. I'm sorry you lost her. I'm sorry you lost your daughters." They stood in silence, two people separated by centuries and species, united by grief. Then the moment shattered. Pain lanced through Alara's skull, sharp, blinding, originating from nowhere. She gasped, stumbling. Cassian caught her instantly. "What's wrong?" "My head. Something's—" The pain intensified, and she realized with horror that it wasn't coming from her body. It was coming through the bond. Cassian's eyes widened. "You're feeling my pain. The sunlight. I'm too close to the window." He swept her up and moved them both deeper into the library, into the windowless alcove where shadows were absolute. The pain receded immediately. "I'm sorry," he said, setting her down carefully. "I didn't realize the bond would transmit that. Most mortals don't feel anything from the vampire side." Alara's legs were shaking. "That's what sunlight feels like to you?" "A fraction of it, yes. Prolonged exposure is much worse." He looked disturbed. "This is another complication of the oath. Our connection goes both ways more than I anticipated. Show me." "What?" "The bond works both ways. Show me what you feel from me." She held up her scarred palm. "If I have to carry your pain, the least you can do is be honest about what you're taking from me." Cassian studied her for a long moment, then slowly placed his palm against hers, scar to scar. The connection flared. Alara felt it, a rush of his consciousness brushing against hers. Not thoughts exactly, but impressions. Loneliness so profound it felt like drowning. Centuries of careful control holding back something feral and hungry. And beneath it all, a bone-deep exhaustion from maintaining walls that never came down. But through his awareness, she also felt herself, her own fear and determination, grief and resilience. And something else she hadn't recognized in herself, hope, fragile but persistent, like winter roses blooming against all logic. He pulled away sharply, breathing hard despite not needing air. "You see?" His voice was rough. "You're carrying light I forgot existed. That's dangerous for both of us." "Why dangerous?" "Because I'll want to keep it. And wanting things leads to losing them." He stepped back, putting distance between them. "You should go. Rest. The bond will settle in a few days and the sensations will become less intense." "Cassian, please." The word was barely audible. "I need time to adjust to this, to you, before I do something foolish." Alara wanted to argue, to demand he stop retreating, but she saw the genuine distress in his expression, the look of someone barely holding on to control. She left him in the shadows. That evening, as twilight painted the sky purple, Victor found her in the gardens. "House Devereaux has withdrawn their forces from the border," he said without preamble, "but they've lodged a formal complaint with the Conclave. They're calling for an inquiry into House Thorne's treaty violations." "What does that mean?" "It means in 3 weeks, Cassian will have to stand before the Conclave and justify his actions. If they rule against him, the blood oath could be forcibly dissolved." Victor's expression was grim. "And you would be handed over to Devereaux as recompense." "Can they do that?" "The Conclave can do anything. They're the only authority all houses recognize." He paused. "Cassian is preparing his defense. But you should know, he's risking everything for you. His house, his standing, possibly his life, if Devereaux pushes for blood debt." Guilt crashed over her. "I never asked him to." "No, but he chose anyway." Victor's pale eyes were ancient and knowing. "The question is, what will you choose when the time comes? Because this won't end with a hearing. Devereaux wants war, and you're the spark he's using to light it." He vanished before she could respond, leaving her alone in the garden with the weight of impossible choices settling back onto her shoulders. Through the bond, she felt Cassian's presence in the house, distant now, deliberately withdrawn, protecting her even from himself. Chapter 9. Before the storm, the days before the Conclave hearing passed in strange intimacy. Cassian began teaching her vampire law, not because she asked, but because, as he put it, "You're tied to House Thorne now. You need to understand what that means." They spent evenings in the library, him explaining the intricate web of treaties, blood debts, and ancient customs that governed vampire society. She learned that the Conclave consisted of 7 elder vampires, each representing a different region and bloodline. that their word was absolute, enforced by powers she didn't fully understand. They can compel obedience, Cassian explained one night, his voice low in the candlelit quiet. Older vampires can impose their will on younger ones. The Conclave Elders are among the oldest in existence, some over 1,000 years. When they command, we obey. We have no choice. That's horrifying. It's necessary. Without it, we'd destroy ourselves in endless territorial wars. He turned a page in the massive tome before them, showing her illustrations of past conclaves. But it also means I'm gambling everything on their interpretation of treaty law. If they decide I overstepped, there's nothing I can do to stop them. Alara studied his profile in the firelight. Are you afraid? Terrified, he admitted, surprising her with his honesty. Not of judgment. I've faced that before. But of failing you, of making a choice that ends with you hurt despite everything. The vulnerability in his voice made her chest ache. Over the past week, she'd watched him work tirelessly, sending correspondence, gathering evidence, building alliances with other houses who might speak on his behalf. He barely slept, though she knew vampires needed rest too, in their own way. You should feed, she said quietly. He went still. What? You haven't fed since the night you brought me here. I can feel it through the bond, the hunger you're suppressing. She'd been sensing it for days now, a hollow ache that gnawed at the edges of their connection. It's making you weaker. I feed from willing donors in the village. I'm not due to go for another 3 days. But you're hungry now. She held his gaze. Because of the blood oath. Because you're using energy maintaining the bond with me. His jaw clenched. I'll manage. Cassian. No. The word was sharp. You're under my protection. That means I don't take from you. Ever. That's not negotiable. Even if it weakens you before the hearing? Especially then. He stood abruptly, putting distance between them. Feeding creates its own bond, lesser than blood oath but still intimate. It's why we require explicit consent, why we only take from those who understand what they're offering. I understand. You don't. His eyes had gone pale, almost silver in the dim light. When a vampire feeds, we feel everything our donor feels. Their fear, their desire, their trust. It's intoxicating in ways that have nothing to do with blood. He turned away. I won't do that to you. I won't take more than I've already claimed. Alara stood, moving closer despite his obvious desire for distance. What if I want to offer? You don't know what you're offering. Then tell me. He spun to face her, and for the first time since they'd met, she saw genuine emotion crack through his control. It would feel good. That's the trap. Vampire saliva contains compounds that create euphoria, that make donors crave the experience. It's why feeding is so dangerous, why it's regulated, why we have laws about consent and frequency. His voice dropped. If I feed from you, you'll want me to do it again. And again. Until the line between protection and possession disappears entirely. You think I'm that weak? I think you're human. And humans aren't built to resist vampire biology. But something in his expression softened. I also think you've had enough people take from you without giving anything back. I won't be another one. The words settled between them, heavy with meaning. Before Alara could respond, Margot appeared in the doorway. Cassian, we have a problem. The problem arrived in the form of a conclave messenger. A vampire so old his skin looked like parchment. His eyes solid white with cataracts that somehow still saw perfectly. Lord Thorn? He rasped. The conclave has moved the hearing forward. You're summoned tomorrow at midnight. Failure to appear will result in immediate forfeiture of all claims, including blood oaths. Cassian's face went carefully blank. That gives me less than 24 hours to prepare. The conclave is aware. House Devereaux has provided new evidence that requires immediate address. The messenger's white eyes slid to Alara. The mortal must attend. The conclave wishes to question her directly. That's not standard procedure. The conclave makes procedure, Lord Thorn. You know this. The messenger handed over a sealed letter. Your summons. Don't be late. He departed in a whisper of ancient robes. Cassian tore open the letter, his expression darkening as he read. They're bringing your father. Alara's blood turned to ice. What? Devereaux convinced the Crown to send a representative. Your father's chief advisor will testify about the palace defenses, the weapons stockpiling, all of it. He crumpled the letter. They're going to paint you as a spy, me as a traitor collaborating with the crown against vampire kind. But that's insane. I didn't even know about the weapons until you told me. Truth doesn't matter. Perception does. He began pacing, his movements sharp with agitation. They're going to ask you questions designed to trap you. If you defend your father, you look complicit. If you condemn him, you look like a turncoat willing to betray mortals for vampire protection. Then what do I say? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost him. I've been preparing for a legal argument about treaty interpretation. This is character assassination. They're going to make you choose between your humanity and your oath. Margot spoke from the doorway. There's another option. They both turned. We run, she said simply. Take the mortal and disappear. The Conclave can't enforce judgments on vampires they can't find. That's exile, Cassian said. I'd lose everything. The house, my title, my connections. But you'd keep your life. And hers. Margot's expression was serious. I know you, cousin. You've been preparing to sacrifice yourself if necessary. But there's no honor in letting Devereaux win because you're too proud to flee. Cassian looked at Alara. It's your choice. We can run, spend centuries looking over our shoulders but alive. Or we face the Conclave and hope justice prevails. Justice hasn't prevailed for me yet, Alara said quietly. Why would it start now? It might not, but running means giving up any chance of reclaiming your daughters. The Conclave could grant you custody if they rule in our favor, part of their judgment powers. His eyes were steady on hers. Stay and fight and you might get them back. Run and you lose them forever. Her daughters. 3 faces she'd barely glimpsed. 3 lives she'd been forced to abandon. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. We fight, she said. Cassian nodded slowly. Then we have tonight to prepare. And I need you to trust me completely tomorrow, no matter what happens. I trust you. The words surprised them both with their truth. Good, he said softly, because what's coming will test that trust in ways neither of us can predict. Chapter 10. The Conclave. The Conclave met in a place that existed outside normal geography. Cassian transported them through vampire speed, that disorienting blur of motion that left Alara's stomach churning. When the world solidified, they stood before massive doors carved from black stone, surrounded by darkness so complete it seemed alive. Where are we? She whispered. Nowhere. Everywhere. Cassian's hand was steady on her arm. The Conclave convenes in a space between places. No mortal witnesses. No mortal laws. Just us and judgment. The doors opened without being touched. Beyond lay a circular chamber lit by hundreds of candles floating in midair. 7 thrones occupied the far end, each carved from a different stone: obsidian, marble, granite, jade. 5 were already occupied by figures so ancient they barely looked real anymore, and standing before them was Lord Devereaux, accompanied by a mortal man in palace livery. Chancellor Varen, her father's chief advisor. Alara's pulse hammered. Varen had been present at her exile, had watched impassively as the high priest declared her worthless. Lord Thorne, the central figure, spoke. A woman whose hair moved like smoke, whose eyes held galaxies. You stand accused of treaty violation, harboring enemies of the crown, and using blood oath to circumvent Conclave authority. How do you answer? Cassian stepped forward, his voice clear and formal. I answer that I have violated no treaty. The mortal princess sought sanctuary during lawful persecution. I provided it according to threshold law. When House Devereaux attempted unlawful seizure, I invoked blood oath to protect her, as is my right as House Lord. Unlawful seizure? Devereaux's voice dripped contempt. She trespassed during a blood moon. That makes her forfeit under ancient law. Trespass requires intent. She was fleeing persecution and unaware of territorial boundaries. Cassian's tone didn't waver. Moreover, she entered under my protection before any other claim could be made. Protection you failed to declare formally. I declared it the moment I brought her across my threshold. Verbal declaration is sufficient under emergency circumstances. The conclave elder tilted her head. This is fascinating legal maneuvering, Lord Thorn. But the charges go deeper than technicalities. She gestured toward Varen. The Crown alleges you've been extracting strategic information from the princess. Information about defenses, weaknesses, palace layouts. I've asked questions, yes, to assess the threat level to vampire kind. To plan an attack, Devereaux interrupted. House Thorn has been accumulating maps, guard rotations, supply routes, all information this mortal provided. The elder's gaze shifted to Alara. Is this true, child? Alara's mouth went dry. Every vampire in the room was watching her with predatory focus. Through the bond, she felt Cassian's tension. Not fear, but fierce protective instinct coiled and ready. I answered Lord Thorn's questions, she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. But not to help plan an attack. To prevent a war my father is preparing to start. Varen laughed, sharp and cruel. Lies from a disgraced exile. Your Majesty the King sent me to inform the conclave that the princess's testimony is worthless. She's bitter, vengeful, willing to fabricate any story to hurt the crown that righteously cast her out. Cast her out for what? Cassian's voice was dangerously soft. For giving birth to daughters instead of sons? For failing to produce a male, heir through no fault of her own? For weakness, Varen said coldly. 3 daughters in succession proves her bloodline is contaminated. The king acted appropriately. The king acted like a tyrant, Ilara said, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. He took my children before I could name them, exiled me for circumstances beyond my control, and now he's building weapons to break a treaty that's kept peace for generations, all because he wants power without accountability. You see? Devereaux gestured triumphantly. She admits to treason against the crown. She's unreliable, untrustworthy. She's honest, Cassian cut in. Unlike your house, which has been manipulating this situation from the start. You wanted her as leverage. When I denied you, you manufactured a crisis to force conclave intervention. Manufactured? Devereaux's eyes flashed. The weapons are real. The treaty violations are real. But your motives aren't about justice. They're about power. Cassian stepped forward. House Devereaux has been trying to expand into House Thorn territory for decades. This is just another excuse to challenge our position. The eldest vampire raised her hand, and silence fell like a blade. Enough. Her voice echoed with power that made Alara's bones ache. We've heard accusations from both sides. Now we hear truth. She looked at Alara. Come forward, child. Alara's legs felt like water, but she walked forward until she stood at the center of the circle, surrounded by ancient power. Look at me, the elder commanded. Alara met those galaxy eyes, and suddenly, she felt pressure. Immense, crushing, like being held underwater. The elder vampire was in her mind, sifting through memories like pages in a book. She saw everything. The birth of Alara's daughters, the high priest's pronouncement, her father's cold dismissal, the flight through rain and darkness, Cassian's rescue. Every conversation, every question, every moment of trust building between them. The pressure released, and Alara gasped, stumbling. Cassian caught her instantly. Enough. You've seen what you needed. Yes. The elder's expression was unreadable. We have. She looked at the other conclave members. The mortal speaks truth. Her testimony is untainted by malice or fabrication, and Lord Thorn's actions, while politically complicated, violate no law. Devereaux's face darkened. But the weapons are the crown's problem, not ours. If the mortal king prepares for war, that's a political matter for houses to address collectively, not an excuse for territorial seizure. She turned to Varen. Tell your king that the conclave finds no evidence of vampire conspiracy with his daughter. Tell him also that we're aware of his weapon stockpiling and consider it a concerning development. Varen's face went pale. The king will hear of this insult. It's not an insult. It's a warning. The elder's voice was ice. The treaty exists for mutual benefit. If he breaks it, he'll discover precisely why our kind has survived for millennia while kingdoms rise and fall. She turned back to Cassian. House Thorn is cleared of charges. The blood oath stands. The mortal remains under your protection. Relief flooded through Alara so powerfully she almost collapsed. But the elder wasn't finished. However, she continued, the situation is untenable. The mortal cannot remain in House Thorn indefinitely without raising further suspicion. She must choose. Return to her mortal life under our protection, or petition for transformation. The chamber went utterly silent. Transformation? Alara's voice cracked. You mean, become vampire? It's the only way to resolve the political complications permanently. As vampire, you'd be under house law rather than mortal jurisdiction. The crown would lose all claim to you. The elder's expression was ancient and knowing. But transformation is irreversible. You would lose your mortality, your connection to human life, and eventually, centuries from now, you would watch everyone you love age and die while you remain unchanged. Alara looked at Cassian. His face was carefully blank, but through the bond she felt his conflict. Hope and fear, and something that might have been longing, all tangled together. I need time, she whispered. You have until dawn, the elder said. Choose mortality and separation, or immortality and belonging. But choose knowing there's no path back once the decision is made. The conclave dissolved, the chamber beginning to fade. Cassian pulled her close as the darkness swallowed them both. Epilogue. Dawn breaking, they returned to House Thorn as the first hints of sunrise touched the horizon. Cassian brought her to the garden, the walled sanctuary where winter roses still bloomed despite the encroaching cold. He stood with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, that military posture she'd come to recognize as his way of bracing for pain. You don't have to decide tonight, he said quietly. The conclave gave you until dawn, but I can negotiate an extension. No. Alara moved to stand beside him, looking out at the roses. Delaying won't make the choice easier. It'll just give me more time to be afraid. You should be afraid. Transformation isn't romantic. It's violent. You die, truly die, and wake up as something else entirely. His voice was rough. Your heart will stop. Your body will change. You'll hunger for blood, burn in sunlight, watch the mortal world become something distant and strange. You're trying to talk me out of it. I'm trying to make sure you understand what you'd be giving up. He finally looked at her, and his eyes held centuries of accumulated loss. Your daughters. If you transform, you can never reclaim them. Vampire parents are forbidden by conclave law. We're too dangerous, too unpredictable. You'd have to watch them grow up from a distance, forever unable to hold them. The words struck like physical blows. Her 3 girls, whose faces she barely remembered, whose names she'd never spoken aloud. What kind of mother abandons her children? She whispered. The kind who's been given an impossible choice by people who never should have made you choose. Cassian's jaw tightened. Your father took them from you. The crown exiled you, and now I'm standing here, tied to you by blood oath, knowing that whatever you decide will haunt one of us forever. If I choose mortality, the conclave will arrange safe passage to a neutral territory. You'll live under their protection. No vampire or mortal authority can touch you. You'll age, have a life, maybe even find happiness. He paused. And the blood oath will remain until you die naturally. I'll feel you out there, living, breathing, free. And then one day, I'll feel you fade. And if I choose transformation, you become vampire. House Thorn. Mine, in ways that go deeper than protection. His voice dropped. We'd have centuries together, maybe millennia. But you'd lose everything human. Warmth, daylight, the possibility of reconciling with your daughters. You'd become the thing mortals fear in darkness. Alara was quiet for a long moment, her mind churning through impossible calculations. Every choice felt like amputation, cutting away one future to grasp desperately at another. "What do you want?" she asked finally. "That's not fair. What do you want, Cassian?" She turned to face him fully. "You've spent weeks protecting me, fighting for me, binding yourself to me. You must have some feeling about what happens next." He met her gaze, and for once, his control cracked completely. "I want you to choose life, real life, sunshine and aging and all the messy, beautiful humanity I gave up centuries ago." His voice was raw. "I want you to find your daughters somehow, hold them, give them the love you were denied. I want you to be happy in ways immortality will never allow. But I'm selfish enough to want you to stay." The admission seemed torn from somewhere deep. "I've been alone so long I'd forgotten what connection felt like. And then you stumbled into my territory, terrified and grieving and so completely, devastatingly alive. And suddenly I remembered why I chose to keep existing all these centuries." Tears burned Alara's eyes. "That's not fair either." "No, nothing about this is fair." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. His skin was cold but gentle. "So choose selfishly, Alara. Choose what you want, not what you think you owe anyone. Not your daughters, not your kingdom, not me. What if what I want is impossible? Then you'll be like the rest of us, living with the gap between desire and reality." She looked at him in the growing light. This ancient creature who'd learned to feel nothing, who'd somehow let her past every defense, who stood here offering her freedom even though it would cost him everything. And she realized the choice had already been made. Not weeks ago, but months from now, in moments she hadn't lived yet, in quiet conversations and shared grief, in learning that protection and partnership could exist without possession, in discovering that immortality didn't have to mean isolation. "My daughters deserve better than a mother who's half ghost," she said softly. "They deserve to grow up free from palace intrigue, from the weight of royal expectations. And maybe the best gift I can give them is to make sure the world they inherit isn't torn apart by war between species." Cassian's expression shifted, hope and sorrow tangled together. "The conclave can arrange guardians," she continued. "Mortal families who'll raise them with love, away from politics and power games. I can watch from a distance, make sure they're safe, even if I can never hold them. That will hurt for centuries." "Yes." She took his hand, pressing her scarred palm against his. "But so will walking away from the first person in my life who's treated me like I matter beyond what I can produce or provide." "Alara, I choose transformation," she said firmly. "I choose House Thorn. I choose you. Not because I'm afraid of mortality, but because I'm finally brave enough to choose what I want, instead of what I'm told to want." For a long moment, Cassian simply stared at her. Then he pulled her close, wrapping her in an embrace that felt like both shelter and surrender. "You're sure?" His voice was muffled against her hair, terrified. "But sure," he laughed, a sound she'd never heard from him before, rough and genuine and alive. "That's the most honest answer anyone's ever given." They stood together as dawn broke fully over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we petition the conclave for transformation approval. It takes time. They'll want to ensure you're mentally prepared, that you understand the commitment." He pulled back to look at her. "Months, probably, which gives you time to change your mind." "I won't. You might, and that's allowed." His expression softened. "But if you don't, if you go through with this, I promise I'll teach you everything. How to hunt ethically, how to navigate house politics, how to survive centuries without losing yourself. And will you teach me how to be happy? I don't know if I remember how." His smile was sad. "But maybe we can figure it out together." 6 months later, the transformation happened on a moonless night in winter. Cassian's bite was quick and precise. One moment Alara was human, The next, poison flooded her veins. She died screaming, her mortal heart stuttering and stopping, and then she woke. The world exploded into sensation. Every candle flame was blinding. Every sound was thunder. She could hear heartbeats in the village miles away, smell blood pumping through Cassian's veins, feel the weight of centuries pressing down through the stones beneath her feet. "Easy," Cassian murmured, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Breathe. You don't need to, but it helps." She gasped air she didn't require, and felt the world settle slightly. When she looked at him, she saw details she'd missed before. The exact pattern of silver in his eyes, the way his lips curved fractionally when he was worried. "How do you feel?" he asked. Overwhelmed, powerful, terrified. She flexed her hands, marveling at the strength coiled in her limbs. "Hungry. That's normal. We'll hunt soon. But first..." He produced a letter, sealed with the conclave's mark. "This arrived this morning. About your daughters." Ilara's unnecessary breath caught. With trembling hands, she opened it. The conclave had arranged guardians, a merchant family in a distant province, kind and stable and far from palace intrigue. Her daughters would be raised together, loved, given opportunities to become whoever they chose. And once a year, from a distance, Ilara could watch them. See them grow. Know they were safe, it wasn't enough. Would never be enough. But it was more than the crown had given her. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me. You did this. You chose a harder path so they could have an easier one." Cassian's voice was soft. "That's what love looks like." She folded the letter carefully and looked at him. This man who'd risked everything to give her choices, who'd bound himself to her knowing she'd break his heart in one way or another. "So what now?" she asked. "Now?" His smile was genuine, touched with something that might have been joy. "Now we have centuries to figure out what forever looks like, together." Outside, the night waited, vast and dark and full of possibility. Ilara took Cassian's hand, and together they stepped into it. Not as princess and protector, not as mortal and monster, but as two people who'd chosen each other across every impossible barrier, and decided that love was worth the cost, even if that cost was everything.